Good morning, folks. This is the Colorado Energy and Carbon Management Commission. It is Wednesday, September 6th. This is our weekly business meeting. We will initiate our meeting with a roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Ackerman.
Here.
Commissioner Cross.
Present.
Commissioner McGowan.
Here.
Commissioner Mesner. Commissioner Oath. Commissioner Ray.
Here.
Commissioner Robbins.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have 5 out of 7 commissioners present.
Great. That's quorum. Good to see everybody. We will start our meeting with commissioner comments. Does any commissioner have comments for us? Seeing none, we will roll through public comment because no one signed up for public comment. With that, we are now on to the next agenda item, the consent agenda. Does any commissioner have questions with regard to items on consent agenda? Seeing none, do we have a motion to approve consent agenda?
So moved.
Second. Motion and a second to approve consent agenda. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Consent agenda is approved. We now would look to elevate Mike Rigby, the coordinator for the ECMC on geothermal, underground natural gas storage, and CCUS. And I believe we're going to receive an update on ECMC geothermal stakeholder process.
Yes, can you all hear me?
We can hear you and see you. Good morning, Mike.
Morning, commissioners. Thanks for having me here today. I'm just going to give a brief update on kind of the process we're going through with deep geothermal regulations and the stakeholding process and what we'll be doing this fall. So let me share my presentation. And are you all seeing the presentation now?
Yep.
So as I said, just giving a quick update. I'm Mike Rigby. I think I've met all of you here, but just to introduce myself, I'm the Geothermal Programs Coordinator. To give a little background on why we're doing everything this fall, SB 23-285 established the ECMC as the regulatory authority over deep geothermal operations in Colorado. This happened earlier in the year. Generally, deep geothermal operations are any operations that utilize non-tributary geothermal resources or any geothermal well deeper than 2,500 feet. Non-tributary geothermal resources are generally geothermal resources associated with non-tributary water, which is water that's not connected to the surface. The shallow operations remain at the Division of Water Resources. So the ECMC in that regard is moving forward to establish rules for deep geothermal operations this fall. To give a little update on what we've been doing, we reached out to an initial focus groups in late July of this year to help inform a path forward. So far, this process has included over 20 meetings with various groups and individuals. The process has been led by Commissioner Ackerman and myself. Some of the initial focus groups include other state and federal agencies, such as the Division of Water Resources, Energy Office, CDPHE, the EPA, and others. We've also reached out to industry organizations and geothermal operators, as well as experts, research organizations like NREL, and universities like School Mines. We've also been talking with local government organizations and environmental and wildlife organizations. So moving forward this fall, we began in August. We made publicly available a form to submit information or questions about deep geothermal operations. This can already be found on our website and under hearings, upcoming rulemakings. We've also just hired a geothermal lead to help develop the regulatory program here, and he will be starting, or actually he has started as of today. So happy to have, it's John Morgan, and we're happy to have him on staff working on this. We are also releasing a deep geothermal regulatory concept paper publicly for some additional feedback. That will be posted on that same link hearings, upcoming rulemakings. And there will be a form to provide feedback to the concept paper. Moving forward, we plan to continue our engagement with all stakeholders as we draft our initial set of rules. This initial set of rules will then be used to initiate a rulemaking this fall. And through, just like any rulemaking process, there will be additional opportunities for feedback and input through that process. And a parallel kind of effort going on that's related is within SB 23-285, it also included requirements for us to address two separate geothermal studies. One is a technical study that includes a resource evaluation, as well as looking at the potential applications of emerging technologies and some other items. That study is due July 1st, 2024. So we are actively working on identifying collaborators and beginning the process of working on that study and moving it forward. There is also a regulatory study that will be in collaboration with the Division of Water Resources that's due at the end of next year. And we will be identifying items for that study as we kind of make our way through this process and looking at if there's additional information we need to review and think about to create an efficient and protective pathway for these geothermal projects. The studies processes are being led by Commissioner Cross and as well as myself. And all of these processes, we will continue to kind of work hard throughout the fall and into next year. And we really are just looking forward to diving in and getting the regulatory program established. And that's really, I think, all the update I have. Happy to take any questions if needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. My video is off because my internet's a little slow here, but I can hear and see everything. Anyone with questions for Mr. Rigby? Commissioner Ackerman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not so much questions as just a comment. Just wanted to recognize and thank Mike Rigby and Ben Boudreau from the Attorney General's office. They've been working very, very hard on geothermal, on the deep geothermal issue. We're moving very quickly. This is something that was important to the governor's office, and we engaged very quickly as an agency, and we're moving through very quickly. Also just wanted to recognize Mr. Rigby's ongoing communication with the Colorado Energy Office and DWR. He's keeping in close communication with them, and wanted to acknowledge the director's help on this issue and her coordination and communication with the governor's office. That said, I think it's going well. I think Mike's doing a wonderful job leading it, and I'm very optimistic about the path forward for a regulatory pathway for deep geothermal.
Fantastic. Thanks for the additional comments, Commissioner Ackerman, and thank you for leading on this important topic. Further questions or comments? All right, seeing none. Mr. Rigby, thank you very much. You are excused to your day job. Thanks for coming and visiting with us.
Thanks, Commissioners.
At this point, we are to receive an update on Air Quality Control Commission NOx reduction rulemaking. I believe we need to elevate Jessica Furka.
Hi all, can folks hear me at all?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry, my audio went out for a second there and I had to convince Zoom of what drivers to use. But thank you all for letting me join you all this morning. I'm gonna share my screen here and I will get started. All right. Well, thank you again for lending me some of y'all's time this morning. I am Jessica Furco with the Air Pollution Control Division's Planning and Policy team. Before I start, I want to note that I do believe I'll be back before you all sometime in October, and we'll be spending some more time with you to get more into the ins and outs of ozone, why it's critical to lower ozone concentrations, a broader look at what we've been working on and doing, and we'll be continuing to do to address ozone in our area. So I won't be spending a lot of time grouting ourselves in that information today. Instead, I will be really zooming in on the work we've been doing in collaboration with the ECMC staff, focusing on reducing air pollution from upstream oil and gas activity that the division and the proposals the division will be looking to bring forward in September to the Air Quality Control Commission. Along with the next collaborative steps we are planning to take with the ECMC to continue this work. These efforts are responsive both to our federal requirements to lower ozone concentrations in the Denver Metro North Front Range, along with the governor's directive to both the ECMC and the CDPAG to reduce emissions of nitrogen oxides from upstream oil and gas activity by 30% in 2025 and 50% in 2030. So first, I'll provide an overview of our proposal related to stationary engines, including engines being utilized in the oil and gas sector. So to start at the beginning, we are looking to reduce emissions from natural gas and diesel-fired engines statewide. Specifically, we are looking at new and existing lean burn engines above 250 horsepower and rich burn engines above 100 horsepower, as well as looking at new and existing diesel engines above 500 horsepower. This includes engines in the oil and gas service, along with engines being used in other industries, including hospitals, public safety, steelwork, and warehouses. We are targeting these engines as our analysis shows that we are continuing to see a good chunk of NOx emissions coming from these sources. I'll start digging in a little more, looking first at natural gas-fired engines. Included on this slide here is a breakdown of NOx emissions from natural gas-fired engines, with rich burn on the left there and lean burn on the right. And these emissions are broken down according to the horsepower of the engines. We're proposing some targeted actions to reduce emissions from these engines, establishing emission standards that must be met by these sources operating. And operators will have a 4-year period to kind of phase in requirements to update their operations of existing engines to meet the proposed standard. And those are kind of outlined on the slides here, what those standards will be based on the horsepower and burn type of the engine. With that phase in, we will be prioritizing engines in the non-attainment area for earlier turnover. And we are also looking to propose additional reporting requirements for engines less than 100 horsepower. Many of these engines are currently not subject to our reporting requirement, so we have limited data available on them at this time. So we're proposing a limited reporting provision to kind of get us some more of that data, and then we'll be kind of reevaluating what steps to take for those smaller engines based on what we learned from that data collection process. The division's analysis shows that when this program is fully implemented, it will reduce emissions by about 2,000 tons per year of NOx, with about 600 tons occurring in the non-attainment area. And the chart here kind of shows the emissions reductions we're expecting to see from rich and lean burn engines, respectively. So switching over to diesel engines, on the slide here, we have a breakdown of NOx emissions from diesel engines, with, as you see, the largest chunk coming from those 500 horsepower engines and above. So to reduce these emissions, we're again proposing some emission standards, specifically that all engines above 500 horsepower meet the Environmental Protection Agency's Tier 4 standards for diesel engines. Sources operating these engines will have a 2-year period to update operations to meet the proposed standard. And we will be calling out kind of one off-ramp for this regulation. So engines that meet the definition of emergency use engines, meaning that they are operated less than 250 hours annually, will not be subject to these requirements. So the division's analysis shows that when this program is fully implemented by 2026, it will impact about 700 engines and reduce emissions by additional 240 tons per year. This number accounts, to the best of our ability, for engines that would be exempt given their emergency status. And so kind of In aggregate, we're looking at total NOx reductions from our engine proposal to be about 2,200 tons per year of NOx reduction once the program is fully implemented. Switching gears, I'll kind of now give a summary of the work we have been looking at regarding reducing emissions from drilling and completion operations, along with our proposal to continue this work to continue reducing emissions from these operations. So with this proposal, we are looking to reduce emissions from drilling and completion operations that occur in the non-attainment area between May and September, which is the time of year where we typically see our highest ozone concentrations. With our rulemaking request this September, we'll be focusing on a rule that will implement regulations to reduce emissions from these operations starting in 2025, which is kind of outlined on step 1 on the slide here. With this first rulemaking, again, we'll just be focusing on requirements for 2025, but we'll be continuing our efforts to secure additional reductions in partnership with the ECMC, which is presented on steps 2 and 3 on the slide here. To kind of give a high-level summary of what we're looking to do this fall, we're looking to propose rules that would first restrict the use of gasoline and diesel-powered equipment in support of drilling and completion operations, and what we've identified as cumulatively impacted communities in the non-attainment area. So these are communities that have been identified as the most vulnerable to environmental health burdens using the Colorado EnviroScreen tool. For operations in the non-attainment area occurring outside of these cumulatively impacted communities, we're looking to establish a daily mass rate limit for drilling operations and completion operations. Operators would be able to use whatever technology or practices that are available to kind of ensure that they are meeting this daily mass limit. So it ensures the use of available technology and cutting edge practices to reduce NOx emissions in an incredibly flexible manner. Furthermore, we are further looking to enshrine that we are looking to meet that 50% reduction goal from the governor's directive by 2030. I'll note that this proposal kind of lives in partnership with the ECMC's process for reviewing comprehensive area plans and oil and gas development plans, which will continue to look into the application of best management practices to reduce emissions. Steps 2 and 3 kind of lay out how we'll be continuing these efforts to reach that 2030 goal. We'll be continuing our work with the establishment of a NOx steering committee that will be collaboratively run by the ECMC and CDPHE, as well as a parallel process involving multiple state agencies, industries, utility providers, and other interested parties to continue efforts to kind of look at the expansion of electrification in the sector. And on the next slide, I'll get a little more into what we'll be asking the NOx steering committee to focus on. But I do want to highlight that we will be using the recommendations of that process to inform rulemakings in 2024 as appropriate, either before the ECMC or the Air Quality Control Commission or both. So this very, very wordy slide here kind of outlines questions we would be asking the NOx steering committee to address during their process to help us inform future rulemakings, including how can operators demonstrate that their project will not exceed a sector-wide allowance over a given calendar year? What is the role of electrification in all this, and how can we consider the feasibility of electrification in these operations? Do we issue some type of NOx allocation process, and if so, what does that look like? What permitting practices do we want to implement, including how do we determine if and when to pause permitting if we are off track with meeting our NOx goals for a calendar year? And I know this is, again, a very busy slide, so I can kind of pause here and let folks read and digest. And I also know that this was a good amount of very high-level information, so I'm very happy to speak in more detail to whatever kind of piques y'all's interest. And then I'll just kind of wrap up. I do want to provide a very, very high level overview of a few other elements that we'll be including in our rulemaking request this fall to kind of complete your preview of what we are looking to do this September. So we are looking to propose a few other changes to our regulations this September. This includes changes to regulation number 3 to implement a greenhouse gas emission fee program. This is pursuant to the statutory requirements of House Bill 21-1266. We'll also be making some revisions to our regulations number 7, 21, 25, and 26 to fine-tune some of our reporting requirements. We are looking to propose some changes to our regulation number 26 to implement additional reasonably available control technology requirements, which is shortened to RACT, for landfill and biogas fueled engines, process heaters, coil coating operations, foam manufacturing operations. We are also proposing a new regulation 29 to reduce emissions from commercial lawn and garden equipment operations. And then we're proposing revisions to our air quality standards regulations to establish new motor vehicle emission budgets for 2026. And with that, that's the end of my slides, and I'm happy to kind of answer any questions y'all might have.
Great, thank you very much. Questions or comments from commissioners? Commissioner McGowan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Furco, for joining us today. I'm just really appreciative that we're trying to work collaboratively to tackle NOx reductions and the requirements from the governor's letter and the 2025 and 2030 goals. And that was a lot of information. So if I had like an elevator speech, I would say we're going to have you're all working on like a 2-part rulemaking, and part A is these smaller engines, limitations during ozone season and near disproportionately impacted communities. Part B will be a more collaborative effort with the ECMC, looking at how we get to that 2030 goal and how we can review OGDP applications potentially at the front end of an application, tying into actual emissions, and then kind of a feedback loop as we continue to see if the oil and gas part is meeting NOx reduction goals. And I'm very excited and eager to work collaboratively with our sister agency on meeting those goals. And the steering committee answering some of those questions we'd like answered about how would that process work exactly.
Absolutely. I think that's a great elevator speech for it.
Other questions, comments? Fantastic. Thank you, Ms. Furco. Really appreciate you being with us today.
Right, thank you all. And thanks for bearing with my audio deficiencies earlier.
All right. Okay, next up is consideration of proposed order to permit director to administratively approve locations for stratigraphic wells. I'm not sure who we have presenting on this, if anyone. Ms. Larson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can certainly speak to this. I'm not sure if our director is in the meeting at the moment, so I'm happy to speak to this matter and introduce it if you like.
Go ahead. That'd be great.
Thank you.
I know I had introduced it, but I appreciate you presenting relative to where staff may be on this.
Certainly. So a few weeks ago, about a month ago now, you brought to the commission the idea that the commission grant the authority to the director to approve OGDP applications that are not in fact OGDP applications. They would be location applications for stratigraphic wells. And a stratigraphic well is sometimes also referred to as a science well. They're wells that are drilled by developers, operators to gain information about the subsurface as it relates to geothermal or CCS operations, and also oil and gas operations. And so the conversation that you started with the commission a month ago, Chair, was to allow for that location analysis and application process for a stratigraphic well to be run solely through commission staff, and then give authority to the director to approve a well. That would be a stratigraphic well in certain circumstances. We staff want to ensure that we are making sure that all of the protections that come with location analysis, well drilling, etc., remain with a stratigraphic well. There would not be any shortcuts, no decrease in the amount of analysis that is given by our staff to these applications. And so the purpose for having the director approve these stratigraphic wells is to ensure that there is a speedier timeline to allow for this initial analysis on projects that are geothermal or CCS. So it would not in any way imperil or impact future geothermal or CCS location analyses. That would still happen in their normal course and would be addressed as those rules are developed in the future. So again, this is just for stratigraphic wells. So that's a very long introduction for the order that has been provided to commissioners and is in your portfolio. That order summarizes this conversation, highlights some of the reasons why this process would be beneficial for staff and for the regulated community, and invites a conversation now among you.
Great. Thank you very much for the summary. And I would note for the record that while this would undo a need for variance, the operator in submitting its information still has 41 different categories of information that needs to be submitted. So it's not a easy lift. It still retains a vigorous analysis from staff. But because the proposed wells for stratigraphic purposes are not akin to OGDPs, it seemed to me, and I think to staff who agreed, that creating a different process with the standing order did make some sense. This would elevate the opportunities for these test wells within the state of Colorado, which is something in line with the ECMC mission that we have now. So I'm in favor of approving the draft order as put together. I want to thank you and thank our attorney generals for helping put this together, and thank Sabrina Trask from permitting, as well as the director for their input into the process. And I think this is a good step forward for the state of Colorado on this issue. Looking around to my fellow commissioners for comments on the proposal. Commissioner McGowan, then Commissioner Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I thank staff also for beefing up, I think I gotta call it beefing up this standing order. I just want to be, my commissioner comment is, I want to be clear for those folks who are going to take advantage or utilize the standing order, that the placement of where these locations will be should be thoughtful and utilized in the same way that we would look at OGDPs. Because when they come in front of the commission, if something looks successful and they want to put a permanent location there, we will still have that overall eye toward, is it near people? Is wildlife affected? What are the long-term implications? All of those things will be considered by the commission. And so I'm hoping that all of that work will be done ahead of time as folks are considering where they're going to put their stratigraphic wells, and utilizing that as a potential, starting point for a permanent location.
Commissioner Ackerman.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I agree that this is very good work, and thank you to staff and to the AG's office. I think this will make for a good process, and it'll be a good opportunity to kind of test pilot this type of stratigraphic approval. Has there been some discussion, Ms. Larson, about potential conversion to rules pending our analysis of how things go under this order?
So certainly the process that is outlined here and the results of this will certainly influence the rules that staff will be drafting and you'll be considering as it relates to geothermal and CCS. And I will note that in the geothermal paper that was previewed this morning by Mr. Rigby, there is consideration about how stratigraphic wells work in that program and how there can be a streamlined process to incorporate stratigraphic wells into the geothermal process. So maybe one more item to note, this standing order, I would anticipate, has a fairly short shelf life, because we do anticipate addressing through rulemaking a stratigraphic well process. And whether that comes up first in geothermal or one of the other rulemakings that we have planned here is to be determined, but we certainly will be bringing it up to the commission as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Ms. Larson. I appreciate that. And the thought that went into this, and I agree that a streamlined process for stratigraphic wells for geothermal and CCS purposes is prudent. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Ackerman. And that had always been my thought as well, is that this was sort of a temporary solution to the issue and that we would codify it in one of our upcoming rulemakings. Further questions for staff or comments from commissioners? Seeing none, I would move that we approve the proposed standing order relative to stratigraphic wells.
Second.
Motion and a second. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. A little bit out of the ordinary, but we're a little bit ahead of schedule. Next on our agenda is docket 2304000109, a financial assurance plan for OMIMEX, OMIMEX Petroleum. Why don't we take 10 minutes? I'd like to fill up my coffee cup that can get the folks into the panel, and then we can return at 9:46. FYI to everyone, we are awaiting the folks from OMIMEX Petroleum to appear. They noted that the agenda was at 10:30, and so I think they were planning on showing up at 10. So what we're going to do is we're just going to continue the pause here until they are able to be found. And once they're found, Ms. Larson, if you could visualize yourself, then we will reconvene at that point in time, if that works.
That works. Thank you.
Okay, so everybody just stay tuned. All right, let's get back together. Mr. Chambers and Mr. Quick, I see you're both on the panel.
Yeah, I can hear you.
What about Mr. Quick?
I don't think he's made it yet. He's probably just going to have to get on when he can. I know he's on a phone call, so well, I guess we'll just have to go ahead and start.
I apologize. I just joined.
Oh, hey, Jeff.
Hi, kid.
Okay, I'm going to call to order docket 2304000109. This is a financial assurance plan. It is by the operator OMIMEX. I may be butchering that, Petroleum. I've got as the representative Christopher Chambers as vice president. Staff is represented by Casey Wolverton, the enforcement advisor. The way this is set up is we've got a presentation in chief by staff for up to 30 minutes, followed by a response from and/or case in chief from OMIMEX, and then a chance for a response by staff. I understand this morning, Mr. Chambers, Mr. Quick, that your company, and I'd appreciate you pronouncing it correctly for me when I recognize you here in just a sec, that you were potentially wanting to seek an attorney to represent you. Can we first speak to that procedural aspect?
Yes, I am a Colorado licensed attorney, and so I'll be sitting in on this meeting on behalf of OMIMEX.
Okay, great. Is the order of play that I just walked through correct in terms of the pre-hearing order and your understanding, Mr. Quick?
It is, yes, correct.
Okay. All right, then either Mr. Wolverton or Mr. Cuthbertson, I believe we're first to hear from staff with regard to this financial assurance plan.
Certainly, thank you, Chair. Would you prefer to do opening statements from both sides and then we'll do the case in chief, or how would you like to proceed procedurally, sir?
Either's fine with me. I noted the pre-hearing order did not contemplate opening statements, but that's fine too. It's always nice to get a sense of what folks are trying to present. If everybody wants to give us an opening statement for, say, 3 minutes or so, that'd be fine. And then we can move to case in chiefs.
That's fine with staff. Thank you, Chair.
Is that okay with you, Mr. Quick?
Yes, it is, Chair. Thank you.
All right, then let's hear an opening statement from staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Good morning. My name is Casey Wolverton, Enforcement Advisor for staff. This is my first time addressing you all directly, so it's a pleasure to speak with you today. We are here today for a financial assurance hearing involving Amamex Petroleum Incorporated, operator number 66190. The director requested this hearing for the purpose of having the commission review Amamex's financial assurance plan. And at the end of this hearing, staff will request that the commission enter an order that Amamex post its required financial assurance within 90 days as required by the Oil and Gas Conservation Act and the ECMC rules. Now, today you will hear testimony from Deputy Director Scott Cuthbertson, in which he will outline the process of reviewing operators' Form 3 financial assurance plans. That process for review is both reasonable and applied consistently for all operators who submitted proposed demonstrated costs as a means to vary from the default financial assurance amounts established by rule. Some of the hearing today will be repetitive of recent previous hearings, but in order to establish a record, I would ask for the Commission's indulgence. You will hear from Deputy Director Scott Cuthbertson, who will testify that Amamex's initial financial assurance plan proposed to use demonstrated costs for single well financial assurance. Further, he will testify that upon review, Amamex's initial financial assurance plan was denied because Amamex did not provide sufficient information to support its proposed costs. After the director denied the initial Form 3, the director filed a notice and application for hearing. In that application, the director requested the commission enter an order requiring Amamex to implement a default option 4 financial assurance plan without demonstrated costs. Moreover, you will also hear within the past couple of weeks, Amamex provided supplemental documentation to staff to support its demonstrated costs. However, that new information still did not provide sufficient support for approval. Additionally, the new information differed greatly from the initial proposed plan and still did not provide enough information to differ from the default amounts. Today, staff is requesting an order from the commission that Amamex post the required financial assurance plan within 90 days, which would be $3,735,000, as opposed to Amamex's proposed amount of $107,395. You will also hear from representatives from Amamex who will mention their current activities in the field and future plans to plug and abandon certain wells. And staff frankly applauds these efforts. However, there is no reason to not enter an order today. If at some point in the future Amamex provides sufficient proof of demonstrated costs, then the rules allow ECMC and the operator to amend Amamex's financial assurance accordingly. However, that future right to amend should not preclude the commission from entering an order today requiring Amamex to post a required financial assurance. Moreover, the annual review cannot begin until there is an approved financial assurance plan in place, and that is why the director is so adamant that the commission approve the financial assurance plan at the end of this hearing. And ultimately, the requested relief is simple. Staff requests the commission enter an order requiring Amamex to post the financial assurance amount within 90 days. Thank you all.
Mr. Quick?
Chair, I believe Mr. Chambers is going to handle the response to the opening statement.
Yes, I'm happy to. Hello.
Okay, well, hold on just a sec, Mr. Chambers. You're not a lawyer, right? You're the vice president?
I am the vice president.
Okay. Procedurally, before he speaks, we need to swear him in, so that we've got that taken care of.
Certainly.
So, AG Davenport, if you could do the swearing in, that would be great.
Sure. Mr. Chambers, would you please raise your hand, state your name, and say that you swear to tell the truth?
My name is Christopher Chambers. I swear to tell the truth.
Thank you.
Great. Proceed with your opening, Mr. Chambers.
Okay, this is procedurally, this is just an opening, correct? So,
Yep.
okay, to keep it short and sweet, yes, we submitted a Form 3. I was the one who authored most of it. I answered every question that was given to me on the Form 3 that was answerable. At the time, we had a quote from a rig operator. It's a very low quote because the arrangement of our deal was the rig operator would be able to retain any metals pulled for sale by that operator, and that's why it was so low. And it states that on the on the original quote. So when we got denied, we decided that's probably something that is not acceptable. We got a different quote from a different company. It's about $11,000, and that's similar to the $10,000 quote assumed by the COGCC. So that's fine. As far as the information not provided, there was nothing in the Form 3 that indicated I needed to provide additional information or more detailed information. If there would have been such a request, I would have responded to it. So I have subsequently responded with the information that was requested. That's the main point about the information. The last point is the reclamation assumed cost of $100,000 per site is unreasonable. We have submitted a quote from a company that has done these reclamations in our locations previously in past years. So they are proven. We have never done a reclamation or plugging job before, so we can't demonstrate any actual invoices to show those costs, but we do have these quotes. That was what we requested per the regulations. So the cost to do the reclamation is going to be much less than what's assumed.
Okay, thank you for that opening. Mr. Wolverton, I believe now we will proceed to staff's case in chief. But before we do that, we'd recognize AG Davenport one more time to swear in any witnesses from staff.
That'll be Mr. Cuthbertson, or Deputy Director Cuthbertson, I presume. Please go ahead, sir.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
I'm Scott Cuthbertson, I'm Deputy Director, and I swear to tell the truth.
Thank you.
All right. And I believe both sides have been allocated 30 minutes for case in chief. Anticipate that one of our staff members will be taking care of time. And that is 30 minutes exclusive of questions and answers. And I did not dock the 30 minutes for the opening. So we will proceed now with staff's case in chief.
Thank you, Chair. If I may share my screen here, there's a small presentation that we have to go with the testimony today. Is everyone able to see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. Good morning, Deputy Director Cuthbertson. How are you this morning, sir?
I'm well.
Sir, if you could please state your name and spell your last name for the record.
Scott Cuthbertson, Cuthbertson.
Thank you, sir. And what is your job title?
I'm Deputy Director for Operations.
Excellent. And how long have you worked at ECMC, formerly the COGCC?
Just over 3.5 years.
Okay. Fair to say you have a lot of experience. If you would please describe your duties and responsibilities as Deputy Director.
So I support our operational staff, which is our 5 subject matter expert operational teams. And I have taken on the responsibility to do this first round of financial assurance while we build that capacity in our staff.
Thank you, sir. Were you involved with the implementing of the financial assurance rules that went into effect April 30th, 2022?
Yes, I began to be involved in December of 22 directly. Up until that point, we had hired a previously retired manager that was helping us build the user interfaces, the Form 3, and help implement the rules. And she was no longer able to continue in that contract work. And so I took over in December.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. And did you review initial financial assurance plans that operators had filed with the ECMC?
I reviewed all of them.
Excellent. Quite a lift. Would you be able to walk us through that process, please, sir?
So the rules were, I think, elegantly prescriptive in that they were very data centric. So the director, and thanks significantly to Jane Stanzik and Chris Eisinger, who had worked to implement a form, the Form 3, that would enable the operators to submit the information required by the rules very effectively. There are 5 or 6 or 7 free form kinds of data requests in the application process, but much of the financial assurance plan itself, the qualifications are data driven based on the previous 12 months. And so that Form 3 really enabled us to enable the operators to submit plans very cost effectively and efficiently, and allowed the director to review the significant number of plans with as effectively as possible, given the significant amount of information that was involved. And so that was the process that we initiated, and we have approved a significant number of plans. We have denied about 35 or 38, something like that, all of which have been referred to the commission. So in these kinds of similar hearings for further analysis and action by the commission.
Excellent, thank you. And what rules are implicated in these Form 3 financial assurance plans?
So this initial financial assurance plan covers rules 702, 703, and 704.
And what types of facilities and operations are the rules intended to cover?
So Rule 702 covers the plugging, abandonment, and reclamation of wells and their associated locations. Rule 703 is a half a dozen different facilities and operations that require specific financial assurance initiated through their own operational form process. And Rule 704 is surface owner protection.
Excellent. As far as the process, do operators need to submit anything to get financial assurance in place? And if so, what is that?
Yes, the operators have to submit at least a Form 3. Many operators have just submitted the Form 3, filled in the, checked the boxes where they had to provide responses as to the kind of assurance that they were going to provide. Many plans were submitted that just complied with the prescribed rules and were easily reviewed and approved because there were no special considerations made. Alternatively, if the operator requested like alternative financial assurance or the use of demonstrated cost, there were additional steps that the operator had to go through and information that they had to submit.
Okay, and how does an operator determine which type of plan they qualify for filing? Do the rules have certain guidelines for those?
So the rules prescribe which plans an operator qualifies for. Every operator qualifies for either an option 1, 2, 3, or 4 plan, and those are all based on the average per well production of that operator's facilities for the previous 12 months. And in addition to one of those prescribed options that they qualify for, every operator can also apply for an option 5 plan, a bespoke custom plan, and then specific types of option 1 and 2 operators might also qualify as an option 6 operator, but that was a more specific set of operational criterion to qualify for that option 6 plan.
Excellent, thank you. And as far as implementation, if we can move to that, are operators' financial assurance plans subject to approval, or how do operators seek approval?
Yeah, submission of the Form 3 is the application for approval. The form will not allow the operator to submit it until they have submitted all the information that is required associated with the options that they have placed. So once they submit the Form 3, it is subject to review and approval by the director. Unless they have made certain requested certain aspects of the plan that would require a commission approval. And for those plans, they have to file concurrently a hearing application with the commission, and the director's review then waits until the commission hearing decides the completes the review and decides the outcome of the application, and then we process the Form 3 in accordance with the hearing outcome.
Okay, and the rules, there are two types of plans, correct? The initial and the revised plan, is that correct?
Yes.
And how do the rules distinguish between those two plans?
There's the only really distinction is the initial plan is obviously the first plan, and it is focused solely on Rule 702, 703, and 704. There is an additional Rule 707 that sets forth the revised plan components that includes some additional types of assurance, compliance issue-based assurance, excess out-of-service wells or out-of-service wells that are not being plugged timely, in general, unique circumstances that the director might be requesting financial assurance for. So Rule 707 is not part of the initial plan, but the initial plan is by far and away the bulk, if not all, of the assurance for most operators.
Thank you. And if I could focus on that initial plan, how does the process work generally for plans subject to director approval?
So as I mentioned, many plans requested no special deviation from the prescribed conditions, the conditions prescribed by the rules. And so the review of those plans was simply a matter of making sure that the information that had been submitted was complied with the expectation of the rules, certificates of financial capability, asset retirement plan, those kinds of things. And if the information was if the information that was included met the criterion, then the director could approve that plan, and has a significant number of times. If the information was insufficient, was marginally insufficient, there are a couple of instances where the director did ask the operator for additional information or to clarify or augment some information that was provided. And sometimes those were sufficient and a plan was approved, and sometimes those were that some additional information was not sufficient and the plan was denied. And then many times the plans that were deficient initially were so deficient in their information that the director just denied the plans. And by the director, I mean me. I was acting on behalf of the director in this capacity.
Excellent. Thank you, Deputy Director. If I may turn to the option 4 plans once more, could you give us some background on option 4 plans specifically?
So option 4 plans are the plans with the plans for operations that have the lowest average daily per well production. And so they are required to provide single well financial assurance for every well. That single well financial assurance is defined in the rules, and the option 4 plans are allowed to submit or contribute that single well financial assurance at a rate of 10% of the total per year until all of the assurance has been contributed. That's the basic gist of the option 4.
Excellent, thank you. Would you be able to flesh out, sir, a little bit of the single well financial assurance? What is that SWFA? What does that entail?
So single well financial assurance is defined by the rules as prescribed amounts for plugging wells. If the well is 4,000 feet or less, it's 10,000, 4,000 to 8,000, it's 30,000, more than 8,000 foot deep is 40,000. And it prescribes $100,000 per location, with that amount to be divided by the number of wells on that location, so that you get a per well, single well financial assurance for that. For each well has its own single well financial assurance that's based on that plugging amount plus the location, the reclamation piece of the location assurance. And alternatively, the rules provide for the operator to demonstrate actual costs or propose demonstrated costs as the foundation for single well financial assurance. And a number of operators did choose to try to provide demonstrated costs as the foundation for their single well financial assurance.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. If I may turn now to why we're here today. Did you review Amamex's initial Form 3?
Yes.
Okay. And what type of plan did Amamex file for?
So they accepted the qualified option 4, or the option 4 that they were qualified to file.
Okay. And did Amamex propose to use demonstrated costs for their single well financial assurance?
Yes, they did.
And I believe you mentioned earlier, but if you could please clarify, are operators required to provide information to support their demonstrated costs as part of their application?
Yes, the rules and statement of basis of purpose make pretty clear the information that's required to support demonstrated costs.
Okay, and in their initial Form 3, did Amamex submit information to support their costs?
Yes, they did.
Okay, and what decision did you arrive at after reviewing Amamex's initial Form 3?
So the initial plan, I found that the information was insufficient. The proposed plugging cost had been discounted for the asserted salvage value of the equipment, which the director believes is not an acceptable foundation for plugging. And the reclamation cost was based on a single estimate for a single location for their 339 well system that at $1,600 per location would have required a significant amount of support for such a low number. And the director just didn't see that level of support in the information that was provided.
Thank you. And after that, the denial was issued, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And next, did the director file the application and notice of hearing, which led to this hearing? Is that correct, sir?
Yes.
And why did the director initiate this hearing?
The concern was that we wanted to facilitate and also provide the operator a platform to make their defense of the demonstrated cost to the commission, but we wanted to facilitate the implementation of the rules so that there was an intentional path forward that was always moving forward. The denial, the director only has the authority to deny the plan. The director doesn't see the authority in the rules to amend and approve an amended plan, and a plan amended from what the operator submitted. And so this was what we believe the most effective course to have the plan reviewed by the commission so that an initial plan could be approved as timely as possible.
Thank you. Are you aware that Amamex submitted additional documentation within the past couple weeks to support their demonstrated costs?
Yes.
And did you review that newly submitted documentation?
I did.
Did that operator's additional submission cause the director to change position? And if so, why?
No, it did not. And the largest consideration was, again, the location reclamation cost. The supplemental information that was provided subsequent to the director's denial of the initial Form 3 and as part of this hearing process didn't address, for instance, known remediation issues that the operator was made aware of in a 901A order that the director issued April 13th of this year. None of those concerns were addressed in terms of the aging infrastructure of the system. And so we continued to not see sufficient information in the supplemental information to support the proposed demonstrated costs.
Excellent, thank you. If the commission were to enter an order today, would AMAMEX be required to post the entire amount of financial assurance this year?
No, as I stated earlier, the option 4 plan, the rules allow option 4 operators effectively 10 years, 10% a year is required to contribute the total financial assurance so that they can bond up over time and submit information over time that would further clarify what the level of single wall financial assurance would be.
Thank you, sir. Do you have anything else to add, sir?
No.
Okay. Thank you, Deputy Director Cuthbertson, for your time today. I have no more questions at this time. I would like to reserve the remainder of my time for a redirect or rebuttal.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Quick, I believe this witness is available to you for cross-examination if you have any questions.
No, Chair, I do not. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioners, do any commissioners have questions of the witness?
Excuse me. I'm sorry.
Mr. Chambers?
Am I allowed procedurally to ask Mr. Cuthbertson any questions?
Normally we let the attorney ask questions, but we are fairly informal here. If you desire to ask a question of Mr. Cuthbertson, go for it.
Just a couple. Mr. Cuthbertson, can you explain to me again what constitutes an option for the submission of documentation for demonstrated costs?
Well, the option 4 is based on the average daily per well production from the previous 12 months. So that's the option 4. The option 4 then requires a single well financial assurance. Demonstrated cost is an alternative foundation for single well financial assurance to the rule defined amounts. And the the statement of basis of purpose makes pretty clear the information that should be included in the demonstrated costs. It includes, I don't have it in front of me, but I know the first one is known remediation issues, location size, well density, proximity, topography, stormwater issues, high priority habitat. There are a list of factors that the rules and statement of basis of purpose contemplate an operator addressing in their information that they submit as the basis of demonstrated costs.
Okay. May I ask why in the Form 3 those specific pieces of information aren't included as answerable?
So the Form 3 enables the operator to make their selections, to make their choices, and does identify attachments that the operator is supposed to include in the Form 3 to address demonstrated cost. And in the review of the Form 3, there's a two-step process. There's an intake process. Part of the intake process is a very quick look to see what the operator is asking for and do they have the associated information. In this case, demonstrated cost would require some attachments to say, here's our demonstrated cost evidence that we are submitting in support of our request to use demonstrated costs. If those attachments are there, it passes intake and goes on to review. The Form 3 that AMAMEX submitted did have attachments that asserted to be the foundation for demonstrated costs. And so that was the information that was reviewed.
And in our case, I think one of the options is to provide historical actual costs, say for plugging or reclamation, as part of the evidence of what the cost really should be. Is that correct?
That is certainly the gold standard. 3 years of actual costs incurred by the operator is what the director contemplates as the gold standard of evidence for demonstrated costs, certainly.
And isn't it true that if there are no historical costs that can be provided, in our case, we've only owned this field since 2020. We don't have any demonstrated costs, actual costs, that we may submit a proposal or a quote from contractors to provide that type of work. Is that correct?
That is something the director contemplated as a type of foundation for demonstrated cost, yes.
Okay, thank you. Lastly, you mentioned that in some cases, there'll be a kind of a back and forth dialogue with an operator if they haven't provided, so let's say, enough information, or maybe there's some confusion on the Form 3 because it is a new form, I believe, and operators are trying to get used to it. In our case, there was no dialogue. It was just flatly rejected, correct?
Yes.
And again, is there sometimes it's okay to have a dialogue and sometimes there's not, I guess. Is that right? Because it seems to me that a dialogue would have gone a long way to having to even have this hearing. So I'm just wondering, my question is, why was there no dialogue?
So the director I took a really consistent approach. There were 160 plans submitted within a 9-month period. All of them had a significant amount of detail in them. Some operators obviously had put more, had been more thorough in their submission. And it's a reasonability call from my perspective. There's no requirement for the director to ask for more information in the rules. The rules say the director may, but if the information that was provided was simply not close, then the director, we made the decision early on to adopt a protocol that those plans would be denied. And by and large, all but 1 or 2 of the plans that submitted demonstrated costs were denied outright. So, you know, the director was pretty consistent in the application of that protocol.
Okay, I don't have any more questions right now.
All right, Mr. Wolverton, any redirect?
Maybe just 1 or 2, Chair. Deputy Director Cuthbertson, in AMAMEX's Form 3 submission, do you recall offhand how much documentation was provided to staff to support their demonstrated costs?
There were 2 pages.
2 pages.
Quotes, so 2 one-page quotes.
Okay, thank you. And why is a quote perhaps not as equal of a gold standard of an invoice or something of that nature?
Well, I mean, so the statement of basic purpose does contemplate other information besides actual costs. It does list actual costs as the preferred evidence. Quotes could be appropriate if they are accurately qualified. I mean, for instance, it's a reasonability assessment. If an operator has 6 wells and they're all the same kind of well, similar depths, similar locations, and an operator submits a single analysis for one of those wells, maybe that's reasonable. A single analysis for 339 wells is not reasonable. There's just more variation across the field than one quote could hope to address. So that's part of that reasonability assessment. But the quote itself is not insufficient as a form in the director's opinion, but the substance of the quote was, significantly lacking.
Okay, thank you. And rather than perhaps have a back and forth, would it be more efficient to file an application in lieu of trying to solicit more and more information when so little was provided?
That is the basis for the protocol that we adopted for this initial plan review, because we were trying to implement plans for every operator we were very concerned about how long it was going to take to implement those rules. And so we did adopt a procedure and protocol that we felt like was the most time effective. Especially with option 3 and option 4 plans, given that option 4 plans only have to submit 10% of the financial assurance that they are required to contribute within 90 days of the initial plan. And the annual review would be happening within the next 9 to 12 months. There would be plenty of opportunity to quickly revise that initial plan if it needed to be. And so the director and I just felt like this was the most effective way to timely implement these very important rules.
Thank you, Deputy Director Cuthbertson. I have no more questions at this time.
Very good. Mr. Wolverton, do you have any other witnesses?
I do not. I would ask that, I'm not sure procedurally this is when we should do this, but I would ask the exhibits be entered into the record and recognized. There are 4 that were listed in our pre-hearing statement and that were also provided to the parties.
Were those in your PowerPoint?
They were not. They're actually in the hearing folder listed as exhibits 1 through 4, staff's exhibits 1 through 4.
Is there any objection, Mr. Quick?
No objection.
All right, exhibits are admitted. We now will turn to Mr. Quick for the case in chief of the operator.
Chair, Mr. Chambers will be providing a statement on behalf of OmniX.
Okay, great. And he's been sworn in, so we'll go ahead and hear from Mr. Chambers.
Okay, this is fairly informal. I understand. So I'm just going to make several points here that I think should be considered. One is we have had to provide financial assurance in the past, a total of probably around $200,000. It's around that number in bonds, and we were able to do that no problem. New rules with the assumed costs put that number at 3.7 million. And in our case, it's unreasonable. Number one, the reclamation cost assumption is extremely high. $100,000 per well is not what it costs to provide complete reclamation of our well sites. Our well sites are very small, and there's 1 well per location. There's not multiple wells per location. That is one point. The other is that the plugging estimate that we originally submitted was about like $1,200 per well. And again, that was because the assumption was the rig owner was going to keep the metal and that would offset the cost. The assumed cost of $10,000 per well, that is a good number for plugging on our wells in Colorado that are all very similar. And I want to make a point about that. We do have 339 wells. They are almost all identical. The only difference is some had pumping units and some don't. But they're all about 2,500 feet in total depth, all have top of cement around 1,700 feet. So the assumption was that the commission, their COGCC, has that data already because much of that data is populated on the Form 3 when you open it to use it. I never thought I would need to submit multiple proposal quotes that would be almost identical anyway. I assumed that the commission knew that, these wells are all very similar. One size kind of does fit all in a quote. So that hopefully addresses why we didn't submit many different quotes for reclamation and plugging. The other thing I'm going to say about the Form 3 is I thought we'd done exactly what we've been requested to do. We provided a proposed quote, explained that we don't have any historical plugging reclamation cost information because we've only owned this field for about 3 or 4 years. We've never performed that work. So we can't submit something we don't have. But next best is the proposed quote from a qualified operator, which we've done. I have supplemented the information that was requested or was pointed out that I did not provide in the form of a PDF document. I don't know if you guys have seen that or not. It does address all the questions. I think my most important point is, if there had been a 10-minute conversation when we submitted this Form 3 that said, hey, by the way, I know it doesn't indicate this specifically on the Form 3, but if you just provide this other information that we need, we can finalize this. That would have done the trick for us. We would have been able to provide that, and maybe even said, we're getting ready to start plugging wells. We'll have to probably provide actual plugging costs and reclamation costs once that's done, to get to a final Form 3. But if the goal is to understand what the actual costs are, that's what we should do. And we are out there plugging today, and are going to have actual costs in a matter of 2 or 3 days for that. Reclamation will follow shortly after, and we're going to continue to plug wells as long as we can. Of overly burdensome, unreasonable financial assurance for us makes that difficult, I will say. We'd like to go up there and just keep plugging like we're doing. We've made a commitment to this. We have a plugging plan. We have our crews up there doing it now. We would like to continue doing that. So yeah, the bottom line is, especially with the reclamation, it is unreasonable by a factor of about 35.
Thank you. Does that conclude your case, Mr. Chambers?
Yes, there's nothing really else to say about it.
Okay. Mr. Wolverton, any cross-examination?
Yes, I would, Chair. Could I ask for just a 5-10 minute recess here to organize some notes before we start back?
Okay, let's return at 10:50.
Thank you.
All right, we are back on the record in 2304-00109. Financial Assurance Plan hearing on Amimex Petroleum. We at this point have Mr. Wolverton for cross-examination of Mr. Chambers.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, before I begin with cross-examination, do we want to do commissioner questions for Deputy Director Cuthbertson or address those later?
Since we're here, why don't we go ahead and do cross, and then we'll just do questions from commissioners to everybody all at one fell swoop.
Certainly, that's fine, sir. Okay, if I may proceed, I believe Mr. Chambers was sworn in earlier. So good morning, Mr. Chambers. I just had 1 or 2 minor questions here, especially in regard to the reclamation costs. Both your original quote and your second submitted quote or bid, they appear to be different in price, and of course far less than the default amount. Can you explain why the original quote, the second bid, and perhaps why that is significantly less than what the default amount is?
Okay, yes. So the quote came from JB Fisher, who lives in Sterling, which is where kind of the middle of our fields are. He's done much work out there on these wells in the past 10-15 years. He has performed several reclamation jobs on these wells and these exact locations. He gave me a quote initially that did not contemplate some items that we discussed. As I've become more familiar with exactly what reclamation entails, which I wasn't in Colorado because we've never done it. I wanted to discuss some of these items with Mr. Fisher and brought up the fact that I think we need to, such as capping flow lines. Just wanted to think real hard again about what the cost really might be for the whole set of reclamation, as I understand it now to be in Colorado, which is not quite what it used to be, a couple 3 years ago. So when he considered those items that we discussed, he said we need to bump it up a little bit. It's not quite what it should be. for an average cost per location. So that's why. And so why is it so much less than $100,000? These are tiny well sites. I've sent you pictures, I think, as a sampling of what our sites look like. They're not massive sites on the sides of mountains. They're out in the middle of these farmlands. They're tiny. Some of them have concrete pads because there was pumping units on them. Most don't. There's at most 5-6 connections that need to be capped. Again, he has done the work previously on these exact wells, this well type, which are all very, very similar. And that's as close to an actual cost as I can come up with is the quote that he gave us. That's what it's a 3-man crew doing the work. It's, they can do more than one a day. He has all the equipment. He's done this, so that's why it's so low. It's $100,000 is outrageous.
So you're saying the reclamation can be completed in one day? Is that accurate?
Now, not all of it. Of course, the seed's gonna have to grow and all that. So I understand that, but the manual work on our sites, yes, one day.
Okay. And do you anticipate doing sampling for contamination on those sites? Is that included in the cost and the quote?
Again, I'm not certain what's required for that. We would if we need to, for sure.
So is it fair to say that that quote could go up if those additional costs are included?
Yes, what I would like to have is a conversation with what constant, since we're new at this and since we're out there trying to get it done, I'd like to have a discussion on what all has to be included in the commissioner's mind before we say there's some sort of a failure and we have to have another hearing. I'd like to know up front and have a dialogue so we know, and then we'll get the quote honed in, but it's not going to be $100,000.
Okay. And did your costs also include disposal of impacted soils?
Don't know that we have a lot of impacted soils. These are little 2-track trails to get to these well sites. I don't know how much we have out there. I don't think we have much.
Okay. And as far as you mentioned a dialogue, were you in receipt of the notice of decision for this? Okay. And did that notice of decision have information that you reviewed for potential as to why it was denied?
I reviewed it. Yes, I did review that.
Okay. Do you recall any portion of that notice of decision that mentioned forms of demonstrated costs that would be acceptable, that would be beneficiary to the director in making their decision?
I don't have it right in front of me. I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to.
Perhaps information lacking about known remediation issues, high priority habitat, as was listed in the notice of decision. Do you recall that?
Yeah, it was just that you received the response that I submitted for that, correct?
Correct, yes. Okay, I believe that's all the questions I have. I do appreciate the time today, sir. Again, I'd like to reserve the rest of my time for closing, if we so choose to do so.
Okay. At this point in time, would like to elevate Mr. Cuthbertson back to the panel. I think it's time for, or Mr. Quick, did you have anything further?
No, Chair, I do not.
Okay. All right. So I think we've got some questions for the witnesses. A little unusual. I should have done questions on Cuthbertson followed by questions on Chambers. So why don't we do it that way? Why don't we see if we have any questions for Mr. Director Cuthbertson first? Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Deputy Director Cuthbertson, for your testimony. If Mr. Chambers had called staff and asked for some information and assistance, would it be available?
Certainly. We don't have the staff to help operators, draft their submissions, but we certainly have the ability to respond to questions about submissions.
Thank you. In the application that folks have to fill out, do we provide some guidance and direction on where to look in the rules and or the statement basis purpose?
Yes, we do. And we had weekly operator meetings all through the fall and the first part of the winter, and then monthly operator meetings continuing. So we've done about maybe 12 or 15 operator meetings talking about the Form 3 and the various guidance issues and the status of the form. And there's been a lot of dialogue about this process since last September.
Thank you. Giving some of the testimony from Mr. Chambers and the documentation that the supplemental documentation that's been turned in, I'm wondering if you have thoughts about the $100,000 per site reclamation amount. That's the default versus what actual cost might be, according to Mr. Chambers.
I concede that, I would be shocked if somebody presented me with actual cost data for a location like Mr. Chambers describes that ended up costing $100,000. It's certainly the exception, but it can happen. We have orphaned well sites in those flatland agricultural counties that are north of $500,000 because of significant salt kills primarily, or other egregious instances that are not the norm and that I don't think should be used as the foundation for the average per se. I would not expect to see an operator submit to me actual demonstrated costs that would support $100,000 per 2-acre or a 0.5 acre parcel that's near agricultural land that has a 2,500-foot single well on a location with not much equipment. I would not expect to see that, but the expectation of the rules is that the operator formulate what their operation specifics are, lay that out for the director, don't rely upon me to do an analysis of their system or use my understanding or perception of their system. I have no right to assert what I believe is true about their operation. They have the responsibility to lay out the story of what they believe is true for their operation that I then review for reasonability.
Thank you.
Deputy Director Cuthbertson, can you walk us through the process once an operator's initial financial assurance plan is approved and the operator desires to, I don't know, update it? And do they have to wait a year? Can they come in with more information once they've actually demonstrated some plugging and abandoning? Is there that opportunity to refine it?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so the rules, the foundation for a financial assurance plan could change monthly, theoretically, right? That average daily per well production for the previous 12 months might change every month. Anytime an operator becomes aware of a change in circumstance, they've bought wells or they've sold wells, there's a requirement to update the plan. As an operator has additional information that informs the foundation for things like demonstrated cost, they can submit a revised or a new Form 3 once they have an approved initial Form 3. They can submit a new Form 3 with that additional information and request the director to review it and amend the plan, or do the same if it's a commission-based plan. So, I think one of the things that's really important is the acknowledgement that these plans can be dynamic and that we're anticipating that they will be dynamic, that we will review them proactively every year, at least once a year, and the operator has a chance to submit a new Form 3 anytime they become aware of a change in circumstance that they believe affects their plan. So there's a lot of opportunity to amend the plan easily. And so, you know, it's a very dynamic process from my perspective.
The operator doesn't have to wait for the yearly review. They can amend it proactively on their own right.
We've had a number of plans that we got revised plans before we could get the initial plan approved even. And we recognized that the operator was following the rules. They were submitting a new plan because of change of circumstance. And we returned to draft the previous plan without even approving it and started working on the revised plan. So yes, there's every opportunity to update this plan as soon as the operator sees the need.
Okay. And following up on Commissioner McGowan's questions, did Mr. Chambers or the operator make contact with commission to seek a dialogue?
I honestly, I can't remember. I'm sorry, Chair. I've talked
I asked
to
Mr. Chambers.
dozens of people.
Yeah, you have 160 plans that you're reviewing. I understand. Further questions for Deputy Director Cuthbertson? Commissioner Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Deputy Director, for testifying today. You answered some of the questions already that I had written down, but just wanted to ask you briefly. So Mr. Chambers mentioned that financial assurance that we're requesting is a significant increase to the historic financial assurance that had been posted. And so recognizing that the financial assurance rulemaking has already taken place, and this isn't the place to dispute the findings of those hearings, could you briefly just describe the overall purpose of financial assurance and why the state found it necessary to increase financial assurance over historical amounts?
Yeah, I believe the premise of that rulemaking was substantive in that the commission had experienced on a number of occasions operations that you know, that ran their operations to the end of life without having substantive financial assurance or savings or a retirement plan in place such that they would just abandon their operations. That was a significant experience. That was a significant occurrence on a number of occasions in the last half dozen years that I have been aware of this commission's operations. And so I think that the financial assurance rules were addressing that concern where operations, especially operations that were nearing end of anticipated life, would have substantive financial assurance in place to deal with the plugging, abandonment, and reclamation of those facilities.
Thank you, Deputy Director. In general, are low producing wells generally at higher risk of potentially needing to invoke financial assurance?
I think generally the acknowledgement is that a low producing well is nearing end of life, right? As a well, some wells can produce at a low rate for a long time, some wells not so much. Typically, as a well, as that production curve drops off, that means that well is nearing end of life. It needs to either have perhaps significant reinvestment in it or a potential abandonment.
Thank you, Deputy Director. My final question would be, in staff's opinion, do cost savings, including salvage materials or operator staff work or other potential savings in P and A&R costs that may be able to be demonstrated by an operator while they're operating factor significantly into the amount necessary for posted financial assurance?
I think they are specifically excluded, right? The rules contemplate third-party kinds of cost estimates or incurred third-party costs. Things like salvage value is not a type of financial assurance identified by the rules and therefore is not a sufficient foundation for a justification for the level of financial assurance from the director's understanding of the rules. Deflated costs that account for work being done by operators' employees also is not representative of the cost that will need to be incurred should the field be abandoned.
Thank you, Deputy Director. Mr. Chair, no further questions.
Other questions of Deputy Director Cuthbertson? Okay, seeing none, any questions for Mr. Chambers? Commissioner Cross?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Chambers, for being here today. I want to go into a couple things that you touched on during your statement and testimony. One of which was you said, and I don't want to quote you, but I believe you said you currently have a plugging plan and you're doing plugging and abandonment operations currently. Is that correct?
Yeah, we have a 168 well plugging plan. We've started on the first one last week, and yes, it's underway.
So you have, is this a developed plan? What are you basing which wells are going to be plugged in?
Yes, sorry. We hired a geologist to help us identify those wells that are nearing the end of their life in the field and have not much more opportunity for production versus the ones that do have much more opportunity for production. And that came out to 168 wells, mostly in the eastern side of our field. And so, yeah, it's a well thought out, constructed plan. And it's going to take, it'll take a while to get to them all. Plugging, we're going to get more and more efficient. So we're hoping to get, at least 4 wells a week done when we're at that level. So yeah, it's underway.
Okay, I appreciate that. And one of the reasons I wanted to touch on this is in your Form 3, under the asset retirement planning description, you said, quote, Amamex Petroleum does not expect to retire all of its oil and gas operations within the next few years, as all of our wells were drilled and completed in the mid-2000s. Based on the projected life of the field, we will plug wells individually on an as-needed basis, based on each well's condition over time. For wells that are inactive or out of service, we plan to put them back into service if possible, or plug if we deem unprofitable. Is that correct?
That's right. However, we have a new information. And the 168 wells that I mentioned, we don't think there's much hope for those. So that was done after we filed that Form 3, that work had been performed.
So after you had was this determination of the 168 wells also done after the determination of the updated information from JB Fisher?
No, the 168 wells, that work was completed early June, maybe late May, early June. The conversations with JB Fisher and the revised quote was recent in the last couple of weeks.
So did you contemplate updating your asset retirement plan to reflect the 168 wells that you plan to plug and abandon?
Yeah, we would like to file a new Form 3 is what I'd like to do, and include all that.
Okay. And then the other question I want to ask about goes to the reclamation itself. You indicated that JB Fisher has done some of the reclamation work for these wells, and that's referring to the previous owner of these wells?
Right, that's correct.
And did you ask JB Fisher to provide any invoices related to those? Did you receive any invoices as part of the acquisition of these wells that discussed the reclamation work that was done on some of these assets?
No, I did not. We simply got straight to the point of, well, let's get a fresh proposal of what it would cost today to perform the reclamation.
And
it'd been 3, 4, 5 years previous that he had done that work.
And did you ask for wells generally, or did you ask for a specific well in that area? Part of the reason I want to understand this is obviously, especially on the Eastern Plains, and I believe you have assets in Yuma, Washington, and Weld. Is that correct?
Phillips and Yuma.
Phillips Union. Okay. I apologize for that. So in some of these different areas, some of them have pump jacks or lift systems, some of them do not. Some of them have more equipment with respect to on-site monitoring versus not. And so I'm just wondering if there's any differences that were addressed in seeking this reclamation estimate, or it was, hey, based on what you've done previously, what do you think it would cost?
Okay, so the first answer is it was more of a general quote because our wells are so similar. There were quite a few wells that had pumping units on them. Pumping units have already been removed. We were intermitting those wells, so that work's already been done. So there may be a few exceptions here and there where we might have a pumping unit still out there, but in general, they're all the same kind of well. They're all shallow Niobrara wells with a meter hut and maybe a pad, maybe not. That's the only difference. Is if there's a concrete pad there.
And then the final question I want to touch on is, you said you don't know how much impacted soil is out there. Is this something that you could determine? And kind of a subpart to that, have you talked to, I guess, are your assets on state-owned land, on private land, and have you talked to some of the surface owners about whether, if there's access roads, they want to keep the access roads or anything like that as part of your reclamation estimates?
We haven't talked. No, we haven't talked to most. We've been first of all, yes, they're on. Most of them are on private land. There are a few federal wells, and no, we've not approached the surface owners. I mean, a lot of times these wells are just like right in the middle of their circular fields. I mean, they're just. Our assumption is we want to return it to the condition of the rest of the field. That's I think it's a pretty safe assumption, but no, we've not spoken to them specifically about that.
But most of them are kind of at the pivot points here, so you're not disrupting agricultural operations.
That's right.
Mr. Chair, I think that's the only questions I have right now. I'll save the rest of my comments for deliberations.
Other questions for this witness? Commissioner Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think Commissioner Cross asked, he followed the majority of the line that I wanted to follow. But I did want to ask, Mr. Chambers, do you know how many of your 339 wells fit within the regulatorily defined low producing category?
Not off the top of my head. Quite a few.
Okay.
I mean, certainly those 168 would, for sure.
Thank you. I looked at the information submitted and found the number 306 of 339, or approximately 90% of the wells being low producing. Does that sound correct?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what the low producing threshold is. But I'm not. That's good. I'll stick by whatever I put in there in the first place.
Thank you. I know that Commissioner Cross explored this a little bit, but can you further? He explored it with regard to your estimator, but in your acquisition of the field, do you have any access to records from the previous owner or owners of those wells?
Some we do. I won't have. We didn't get a lot of detailed records like that. That company since shut down, and whatever computer records there might have been, I've tried to go back for some other things like that, and it's just unavailable.
Yeah, thank you. And I wanted to understand and acknowledge your statements about why you submitted what you submitted on the Form 3, and believe that you were answering the questions there. You know, I think that this discussion today has made clear that the expectation is a more thorough analysis. One example that I would point out that it's, you know, somewhat minor, but in the pre-hearing materials, the answer to a soils question was just there are no sandy soils. But my personal knowledge is that there are significant sandy soils in Yuma County. And so I don't know if that response is done on a site-by-site analysis of each well site and demonstrated the soil types, that there are no sandy soils. But from my perspective, that would be the expectation if we're going to talk about demonstrated costs, and then, you know, kind of extrapolate that through the other issues that are addressed. It sounds like you were unaware really of the expectation to provide a more thorough analysis of a retirement plan. Would you have, oh, I'm sorry.
My computer's about to die. I need to run the other room and grab a cord, if I may.
I certainly am willing to pause, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I'll be right.
Sure. Let's pause. All right, Mr. Ackerman, do you want to repeat the question?
I will. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I was just stating, Mr. Chambers, that it sounds like you were unaware of the expectation to provide a thorough analysis of a retirement plan for actual existing assets. And given the content of this hearing, as well as its preparatory materials, would OmniMex have the ability and interest to do a thorough analysis of its assets that would include information pertaining to the items that would indicate a reasonable demonstrated cost of the wells that are analogous to yours? And if so, how long do you estimate it would take to do so?
Well, questions I would have, I mean, yes, we would first of all be interested in doing that. And whatever else we need to do. And how long that would take, it could be, I would be able to answer that as soon as I talk to one of our guys out there. It may be very quick. It may take a lot of visits. I'm going to say we would do it in conjunction with our, you know, with our plugging, and just get as much done as we could. Probably, I mean, I hate to put a number on it. I would think several weeks it would take to get all of them analyzed, or it, you know, the data may already be available for some of those issues that is already out there. So I'd have to just go find out. It's somewhere between a week and several weeks. I don't know.
Understand, and thank you for providing kind of an on-the-fly answer, and recognize that's difficult to do. Thank you, Mr. Chambers.
Can I put on something you touched on? You're correct. I did not know that level of detail was required. The Form 3, I mean, I went back and looked at it again. There was nowhere on there I noticed that. I mean, it might be helpful for other operators if it's more, you know, explicit in the Form 3 that this is, you know, if you're going to choose this option and go this path, you be sure and address that you know, all these elements that we're going to be looking for. I mean, it would avoid something like this.
Thank you, Mr. Chambers. I really appreciate and value that input as one who's gone through the form. Thank you for providing it as part of this hearing. Nothing further at this point, Mr. Chair.
Other questions for the witness? All right, seeing no further, take it back, Commissioner McGowan.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chambers. One last question. I think that we were contemplating earlier. Did you reach out to staff and ask for some feedback or for some assistance or questions about your application?
Not initially. It was a flat denial. The hearing date had been set back to June, and so we were at the time had other issues going on in other parts of our company that were being addressed. So postponed it. You know, any kind of thought about that. The hearing then got postponed to August, and for the record, it wasn't at my request. It was some kind of a scheduling issue that the hearing officer had, and then they tried to undo the change, and I had already scheduled something else for that date, and so then it got pushed to late August. I didn't, before, I think first part of August, I want to say, I did start reaching out to Mr. Wolverton, and who has been very helpful, I will say, and accommodating. And we, at that point, when we started having a dialogue, I wasn't even sure who to talk to at first. I talked to Mr. Kirshner about some other issues. It was a little bit confusing from my standpoint on who the right person was to talk to.
Thank you. And can you remind me when you purchased these assets?
April of 2020.
And when you bought these assets, were you aware of the condition of the wells and where they were located and what kind of wells you were what kind of equipment you were purchasing?
Yeah, sure, we did.
It feels a little bit like when we're asking some of these questions that you're not really aware of the condition of some of your equipment or the locations or the soils, etc.
Well, when it comes to specific climate related, environmental related details, no, I wouldn't probably know all of those. But in general, we had a good feel for what these wells were. Niobrara wells, 2,500 feet. Company was trying to basically get rid of them. They were still producing. There were lots of good reasons for us to do the transaction, but down to that level of detail, we did not dive right off the bat.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I was muted. Commissioner Ackerman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm sorry for the repeat back to me. I just had one more question. And Mr. Chambers, you may have stated this already, and I apologize if I missed it. But your plan is you have a retirement schedule right now for 160 wells. Did you state what the time period was for the completion of those P&A activities?
We had hoped to get them done in about a year and a half. It's if we can get to that 4 wells per week type of schedule, taking into account we're going to have some holdups in the wintertime. It may be close to 2 years overall for that. As quickly as we can is the answer. We have no reason to slow down. There is we have a high priority habitat situation in most of our producing area, and I don't know how slow that will make us go in the wintertime, which is a bad period of time for this area. But again, I'm year and a half, 2 years. I'll know more as we perfect our process.
Understood. Thank you, Mr. Chambers. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing the additional question.
Absolutely. Further questions? All right. Mr. Wolverton, did you desire to provide any sort of closing statement?
Yes, Chair, if I could, thank you.
All right, go ahead, and then we'll let Mr. Chambers close, and then we'll move to deliberation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, commissioners. Good morning once again. I'm Casey Wolverton, Enforcement Advisor for staff. Again, it's my first time directly before you. I'm grateful for this opportunity to speak with you all about this financial assurance matter. When I began today, staff made a simple request that Commission enter an order requiring Amamex Petroleum Incorporated operator number 66190 to post the required financial assurance amount within 90 days of the order. That amount of $3,735,000 is reasonable within the ECMC rules, and the amount proposed by the operator is insufficient to cover the 339 wells. As you heard from Deputy Director Cuthbertson, the process was applied consistently and concisely, and after careful review, ultimately the director found that Amamex provided inadequate evidence to support its demonstrated costs. Amamex, aware by the denial letter and conversations with staff, then provided further still minimal information. And as we heard from Mr. Chambers' own words, the general quote could go up. The information provided could change because other factors have not been considered, such as sampling for contamination, sandy soils, impacted soils, and high priority habitat. Amamex estimates that the detailed analysis could take weeks. Well, as I previously mentioned, what staff is asking for is that order and that payment to be made within 90 days. That well contemplates several weeks of the ability for the operator to file some sort of change or a new Form 3 of some sort, or provide additional information and really secure the necessary paperwork that staff is looking for. The rules contemplate that, and to almost sound as a broken record, the rules are important and are put in place to protect, among other things, public health, safety, welfare, wildlife, and the environment, which is why staff is vigorously renewing its request to enter an order for Amamex to post the required amount of financial assurance. I would like to thank everyone for being here today, representatives from Amamex, those listening, Deputy Director Cuthbertson, and the staff members who have worked so hard in this financial assurance process. And thank you, Chair and Commissioners. We eagerly await your decision.
Any closing from Mr. Chambers or Mr. Quick?
Yes, I would say that in closing, we want to continue our plugging program. We're focused on that. It's happening. We would like to update the information, file a new Form 3. Yes, we're willing to do whatever work we need to do to hone that, especially that reclamation estimate to the right number. But in no case can I see that number being much higher than it maybe by, even if it's a factor of 100% of what I've provided. It's not going to be $100,000. That is unreasonable, and it's frankly undoable for us. It's that would negatively impact us. Is all I can say. We will continue to have more actual cost information, and as I mentioned, we'd like to file an updated or a new Form 3 or whatever the process is for that encapsulates all the information that I now know needs to be included.
Thank you very much. We now will turn to deliberations of the commission on the financial assurance plan at docket 2304-00109. I can start out with my initial thoughts. Appreciate the efforts here, Mr. Chambers, but I do not believe that we're in a position to accept the numbers that you have provided. I think that we've not received enough information as contemplated by the rule that establishes a fair demonstrated cost number. I am in favor of executing a financial assurance plan that incorporates the default costs. That is the, whatever that total number is, $3,735,000, and that would be putting up a tenth of that within 90 days. And I would note, as you have reflected, that you're in the process of plugging and abandoning 4 wells a week. I think that during this 90-day period, you will have ample opportunity to provide additional demonstrated cost to the director. And I would ask the director that if you do that, that the director expedite the review of that so that you could potentially alter the financial assurance plan to make it more of a actual demonstrated cost plan. But I think it is important for the commission, for the state of Colorado, that we not let these things languish and not get operators to work toward providing that. I think we've built into the financial assurance rulemaking a safety net for folks in your situation, where even if you didn't meet the bar on demonstrated cost initially, there is an ample opportunity to meet that between now and 90 days from now. And I'm thrilled to hear that you've already established within your company a protocol in which you're going to actually demonstrate the cost that it's going to cost. And I think that that opportunity will avail itself for you. Again, I would direct the director that if amended forms are moved in, then the staff should respond to that. I would direct the director to engage in, a dialogue at that point in time. It doesn't appear that a dialogue occurred. I don't know that anybody was like nefarious on that front. It just didn't, you didn't reach out, and staff has 160 plans that they're trying to reach out to. We are all learning the process. I think that the process here is successful today, and I think that there's ample opportunities for there to be a refining of the financial assurance plan for your company. That's one commissioner's deliberative thoughts. I'm interested to hear from my other commissioners as well. Commissioner Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start off by saying I agree. I do think that this is a situation where demonstrated costs can be provided, and I recognize that Mr. Chambers indicated that he is willing to provide an updated Form 3 with further defined demonstrated costs, and I encourage that to happen. But under what we have now, I can't accept what's been provided. I don't mean that to say that I think the provided reclamation costs are wrong. I just don't think there's a lot of information in there. I do want to touch on just a couple things. I think number one, I do agree with both Deputy Director Cuthbertson as well as Mr. Chambers that I would not expect to see $100,000 in this area. And so I think that's an important stepping point for those demonstrated costs. You know, there are areas of the state where well pads are on slopes and there's a lot of rework that has to get done. There's a lot of access roads that have to get done. And so that's where this assumed $100,000 comes from. And the rules do allow for operators under any of the plans to provide those demonstrated costs to try and lower that. And I think that that's an important understanding in how the financial assurance rules work. I do also just want to make a quick note that I agree with Deputy Director Cuthbertson, excuse me, that in explaining why we're not looking at the salvage value of information. I think a couple points that are of information that are important to know for this is if everybody's allowed to lower their expected cost of what they're going to pay because there's an assumption that the state will just be able to sell the equipment, that's a big assumption. I think we'd have to hire a lot more staff to go through selling all the equipment and doing everything, and it really lowers the amount that we'd still have to pay up front if these wells were orphaned to get everything done. Additionally, there's concerns with it because there's depreciation of equipment, and that amount's going to change over time. And so it's not something that we can just rely on to say like, yeah, don't worry, we can sell the pipes, we can sell whatever equipment is used for the production operations and make up the money for that. It's not a given. It's not known. Different equipment is going to be in different conditions, and that's going to change over time. The second thing I'd like to talk about is going into the questioning. I appreciate that a plugging and abandonment plan is occurring. I think that's great. I think that kind of information will be very helpful to provide some details on it, because I think that's an important part of the financial assurance plans, regardless of the option, is the commission and the public, frankly, understanding what a company is planning to do with these assets. Companies are not going to be able to drill forever. Assets, you know, whether it's a option 5 that we've discussed last week, where you're going to have situations where, yeah, maybe we can recomplete, and then after we recomplete, they will go above a certain amount, then they will be profitable. But understanding what kind of timeline a company sees and when they're going to plug and abandon, when the wells are not going to be profitable. And I think the more detailed, the better, which I think Mr. Chambers is understanding from some of the questioning that was received here today. I think just a statement of, we don't expect everything to be plugged and abandoned in the near future doesn't really provide the commission a lot of information to understand, are we expecting the 339 wells to be plugged in the next 10 years or in the next 30 years? And that gives us a better understanding of what we should expect from demonstrated costs as well. And then the third point is the demonstrated costs themselves. And I'll sort of say this as a direction to Mr. Chambers, as he said that he plans to go back and file an updated Form 3. I encourage you to work with JB Fisher, especially if they have done some of the reclamation work for some of these, to see what information that they can also provide for you, to provide more detail again, saying, all right, on well sites of 0.5 acres, if this is what it is, if we have to remove a pump jack, if we have to remove other lift equipment, if we have to remove just a wellhead, if we have to remove X amount of flow lines, if we have, whatever the case may be, see if the more information that they can provide, the better, because that's truly what I think demonstrates the cost. Again, I don't think this is going to be $100,000. I don't disagree with you there, but we can't just say, look at one page that says, we think seed will be this much, you know, this much per hour of a worker. Let's make it $10,000. That or $2,000 or whatever the case may be. That just doesn't provide us a lot of information that we can say, yeah, I think the work has been put into this, that if a well were to go into the orphan well program, the state's going to be comfortable in saying, yes, this is the correct amount. They don't want to be caught with any surprises, say, yeah, a third of the wells really required that much reclamation, but 2/3 of the wells actually had a lot more to it. And that's why I think that the general estimate is not going to really help us with the demonstrated costs. And then finally, a point that Chair Robbins touched on, and I think it's important to note as well, is we can't rely on staff to kind of do the work for operators. As Deputy Director Cuthbertson indicated, there's 160 different plans that are going on. We can't make it incumbent on staff to reach out and say, hey, this information wasn't enough. Why don't you provide us this as well? Because if he's doing that to 160 different people, that's going to take up all of his time, and he has other requirements that he has for his job as well. And so I do think it's incumbent on operators, if they do have those questions, to attend the operator meetings, to look through the statement of basis and purpose, to reach out to staff and say, I have a question on this. You said it wasn't sufficient. What kind of information would you want? I think that's a much more reasonable expectation in how we can work with operators to make sure that we get things done. And that's the comments I have.
Further deliberative comments? Commissioner Ackerman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate all attending today and the civil manner in which the hearing was heard. I always appreciate people being professional, and thank you for doing that. Recognize this is a relatively new endeavor, and so it does require some discussion and some innovative talking about how we move forward. Wanted to reiterate that the financial assurance program is intended to protect the state, pure and simple. Historic financial assurance rates have left the state holding the bag on previous operations to the tune of several $million. Financial assurance revisions on the part of the commission have been very deliberate, and I'm dedicated to ensuring that operators bear the cost of properly retiring their assets. Included in that, I would reiterate that financial assurance does not take into account potential staff work, or in this case, pipe salvage sales deductions, but rather is based upon reasonable costs that a third party would have to be engaged to plug and abandon and reclaim and remediate sites. I also agree that the operator provided inadequate evidence to support single well financial assurance. And I believe that the costs proposed by the operator would prove to be inadequate over time, but to what extent, I'm not sure from the information provided. The reclamation cost has come up several times during this hearing, and it was set based on specific analysis during the financial assurance rulemaking. And as I stated in my question to Deputy Director Cuthbertson, it's not the intent of this hearing to address whether any regulatory number, in this case, the $100,000 per site reclamation cost, is the appropriate figure. The financial assurance statement of basis and purpose reads, the commission determined that the most reliable data presented at hearing demonstrated that a $100,000 location reclamation cost would be sufficient to reclaim the majority of oil and gas locations in Colorado. So I recognize that this has been set as the standard, and I recognize that reclamation of some sites can be more pricey than that figure. But I also agree with the statements that have been made that it's likely that $100,000 per site for this operator in reclamation costs may prove to be high. However, in order to deviate from the standard, I believe it is reasonable to expect significant proof analyzing an operator's assets and demonstrating actual costs, or in the absence of the ability to demonstrate actual costs, a thorough financial analysis specific to an operator's assets, detailing estimated costs on a well-by-well basis, including but not limited to known remediation issues, areas of initial and total disturbance, associated off-site facilities, the number of wells at each location, whether there are cut and fill slopes, slope ratios, whether it has sandy soils or salt kills, or whether the oil and gas location is in high priority habitat, whether topsoil has been salvaged at the oil and gas location. I think a site-by-site analysis by this operator, given its number of sites, is appropriate. However, I also would be open to the thought of grouping analogous wells into certain groups of estimates as well. And I think I would find it dubious to see a statement in the future that does an analysis of all these things, but just a single analysis and says all of our wells are the same. I think that would be a difficult pill for me to swallow. I think it needs to be a systematic analysis of the system in order to discuss single well financial assurance. And as OmniMex has scheduled to P&A 160 wells, which is roughly 47% by my calculations of their holdings in this field, 4 wells a week over the next several months, I would agree that there will be significant justification for a follow-up discussion about the appropriate amount of financial assurance hearing on an ongoing basis. But at this point moving forward, I also would support a financial assurance plan based on the standard amounts as listed in the regulations pursuant to the very thorough financial assurance rulemaking. That's it for now, Mr. Chair. Thanks.
Thank you. Further deliberations, Commissioner McGowan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have much to add. I appreciate, Mr. Chambers, that you made an attempt to work your way through our rules. I would encourage you to do some background and research about why the rules were set up the way they are and look at the guidance and the statement of basis of purpose. I think it's really helpful to understand where the commission is coming from. Unfortunately, what you submitted wasn't enough, I think, for us to say, let's accept this. There's not enough information. There's not enough documentation. There are some general sweeping assumptions about your asset, your portfolio. The goal here is to make sure that by the time you get to the end, there's a little retirement plan in place for your wells, and the commission's not left, again, I'll just say it, we say it all the time, holding the bag. I think there is opportunity for you to submit something that will be more tailored to what you have. I agree, you probably don't have $100,000 per site reclamation cost, but you haven't demonstrated to us what those costs actually might be. And to Commissioner Ackerman's point, potentially, you could group your wells and talk to the commission about what you see for demonstrated costs. So I think there's an opportunity for you to come and amend your application, but for now we need to have something in place, and we have rules that are in place for that purpose. And I would support staff's recommendation and encourage Mr. Chambers to submit an amended application when he gets the appropriate documentation to do so.
Very good. Thank you, everyone, for deliberative thoughts. Does anyone care to make a motion? Commissioner Ackerman?
Mr. Chair, I move that we accept staff's recommendation and impose a financial assurance plan as provided using the standard amounts in the regulations.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Chambers. Thank you, staff. We look forward to your continuing your efforts in plugging and abandoning wells and providing additional information to the deputy director along the lines of the deliberative thoughts from the commissioners this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Commissioners, it is 11:48. We have one more matter before us, and it looks like, based on the pre-hearing state or the final pre-hearing order, it could be a long one, 2.5 hours worth of set aside. I would suggest perhaps we go ahead and take our lunch break, maybe return at 12:30, because it's about 45 minutes. And at that point, we would take up docket 2305001. See.
The chair cut out a little bit, but I believe his intent was for us to reconvene at 12:30.
Yes, that was my intent. Sorry if my internet was just slowing down. 12:30.
Thank you.